Joan Park hated diplomatic events. He tugged at the stiff collar of his formal uniform as he watched aliens and humans mix awkwardly in the large hall. After 3 years on Outpost Horizon, Earth's first deep space diplomatic station, these gatherings still made him nervous. "Remember to smile," his boss had told him earlier. But not too much. The Eridani think excessive smiling means you're hiding something. June sighed. Everything about the Eridani was complicated. Tall and slender with silvery blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the lights, they moved with a grace that made humans look clumsy in comparison. Their four-fingered hands performed elaborate gestures when they spoke, a secondary language that most humans couldn't begin to understand. As the station's top xenolinguist, June's job was to understand. 3 years of study, and he still felt like a child trying to read a college textbook. He grabbed a drink from a passing server and found a quiet corner to observe from. The Eridani delegation stood in a tight cluster on the other side of the room. Even at a party, they maintained perfect posture and spoke in careful, measured tones. Captain Min appeared beside him. "Hiding again, Park." "Observing," Jim corrected. "It's what you pay me for." Min laughed. "What I pay you for is to talk to them. Ambassador Ta wants us to make a better impression tonight. The trade negotiations start tomorrow, and we need the Eridani in a good mood." June knew what that meant. He was being sent in as the diplomatic guinea pig. If he made a mistake, at least he wasn't someone important. "Fine," he said, downing his drink. "Which one should I approach first?" Min pointed to a female Eridani standing slightly apart from the others. "That's Diplomat Nera. She's new to the station, arrived on yesterday's transport. Intelligence says she's more open to humans than most. Start there." June studied his target. Nara was taller than the other Eridani females, her skin a deeper blue that almost looked purple under certain lights. The ridges along her scalp, what humans called crown ridges, were more pronounced, curving elegantly back from her forehead. Among the Eridani, this was considered a sign of intelligence and high breeding. Great, a high-born intellectual, just what his knight needed. "Remember," Min said, "use the formal greeting. 3rd rank honorific. She's equivalent to a deputy minister back on Earth." June nodded and began making his way across the room. He rehearsed the greeting in his head, going over the complex combination of words and hand gestures required for a proper Eridani formal introduction. As he approached, Nera turned to watch him. Her large, almond-shaped eyes, entirely black except for small purple irises, regarded him with what seemed like mild curiosity. Eridani faces had fewer muscles than human ones, making their expressions subtle and easy to misread. June stopped at the proper distance, not too close to be intimate, not too far to be dismissive, and began the formal greeting. "Honored Diplomat Nera," he said in the Eridani language, his voice carefully modulating the tonal shifts. "This one offers respectful acknowledgement of your esteemed presence." His hands moved in the accompanying gesture pattern, fingers splayed then curving inward in the way that indicated professional respect. He was halfway through the second part of the greeting when he realized his mistake. He had used the secondary diplomatic honorific, appropriate for a 4th rank official, not a 3rd. It was a subtle difference, just a slight change in the curve of his final finger placement, but to an Eridani, it would be glaringly obvious. June froze. Diplomatic incidents had been sparked by less. The Eridani were notoriously sensitive about proper protocol, and he had just effectively demoted a high-ranking official in public. He braced himself for the cold, cutting response that typically followed such a breach of etiquette. Perhaps she would simply turn away, which was the Eridani equivalent of a shouted insult. Or worse, she might file a formal complaint, which could set back negotiations for weeks. What happened instead shocked him more than any reaction he could have imagined. Nera's thin lips curved upward at the edges. It was slight, barely noticeable to someone who hadn't spent years studying Eridani facial anatomy. But to June, it was as obvious as a human grin. She was smiling, sarcastically. The Eridani didn't smile. Their culture had no concept of expressing emotion through facial movements. Their bodies remained still when they spoke, emotion conveyed through elaborate hand gestures and voice modulation. Yet here was this high-ranking diplomat responding to his mistake with an unmistakably sarcastic human expression. "Linguist Park," she replied in perfect, unaccented English. "Your attempt at our greeting ritual is noted. Perhaps next time you will remember that I outrank a trade negotiator." Her voice held no anger, just a dry, almost playful tone that matched her expression perfectly. Before June could respond, she continued in Eridani, using the correct honorifics that he should have used for her, then adding, "Though I admit, your pronunciation has improved since the recordings I studied during my journey here." June blinked, momentarily speechless. Not only had she brushed off his mistake, but she had complimented him, another behavior unusual for the typically critical Eridani. "You've studied my work," he finally managed to ask, switching back to English since she seemed comfortable with it. "Your papers on human Eridani communication differences are required reading for diplomats assigned to human stations," she replied. "Though I find your conclusions about our lack of facial expressions—" She paused, and that small smile returned, incomplete. Across the room, Captain Min was watching, his eyebrows raised in surprise. The other Eridani had also noticed the exchange, their postures stiffening in what June recognized as disapproval. "I apologize for my error," June said, returning to formal Eridani speech patterns. "If you would permit, I would welcome the opportunity to correct my understanding about your species' expressiveness." Nara tilted her head slightly. This was an Eridani gesture of consideration, one of the few physical movements that carried consistent meaning across their culture. "Perhaps that would be valuable," she said, "for both our species." A server approached with a tray of drinks. Nara selected one of the glasses containing a pale blue liquid, an Eridani refreshment that humans couldn't digest. June took a glass of wine, more to have something to do with his hands than because he wanted it. "The humans on this station speak of an observation deck," Nara said after taking a small sip. "They claim the view of the surrounding space from there is. I believe the term they used was breathtaking." June nodded. "It is." The station was positioned specifically to face an emission nebula. At this time in the station's rotation cycle, it should be particularly visible. Would this be an appropriate setting for a continued exchange of cultural observations? She asked. It took June a moment to understand what she was suggesting. Was she inviting him to leave the diplomatic function to show her the observation deck? This was so far outside normal Eridani behavior that he wasn't sure how to respond. "It would be my honor to show you the observation deck," he said cautiously. Nara set down her barely touched drink. "Then let us proceed. I find these gatherings inefficient for meaningful exchange." As they moved toward the exit, June caught Captain Min's surprised expression. The captain gave him a subtle thumbs up before turning to distract the other Eridani diplomats, who were watching Nara's departure with what seemed like concern. The corridors of Outpost Horizon were quiet compared to the reception hall. Their footsteps echoed against the metal floors as June led the way toward the station's upper level. "Your colleagues seem disturbed by your decision to leave," June observed, breaking the silence. "My colleagues adhere strictly to traditional protocols," Nara replied. "They believe meaningful diplomatic relations can only occur through established channels." "And you disagree?" That small smile returned to her face. "Let us say I take a more experimental approach to interspecies relations." They entered the lift that would take them to the observation deck. As the doors closed, June found himself studying Nara more carefully. Everything about her, from that human-like smile to her willingness to break from her delegation, suggested she was unlike any Eridani he had encountered before. "You're curious about my behavior," she stated, not a question but an observation. "Yes," June admitted. "It doesn't match the established patterns." "Perhaps your established patterns need revision," she replied. The lift slowed as they reached the top level of the station. Humans pride themselves on adaptability. Should we Eridani not demonstrate the same quality if we wish to maintain relations with your species? The lift doors opened to reveal the observation deck, a large circular room with a domed ceiling made entirely of transparent aluminum. Beyond the dome, space stretched out in all directions, a canvas of perfect black dotted with stars. And dominating one side of the view was the massive purple-red swirl of the emission nebula, its gases glowing with an inner light that seemed almost alive. Nera moved forward, her normally perfect posture relaxing slightly as she gazed upward. For a moment, she said nothing, simply taking in the view. "You were right," she finally said. "Breathtaking is an accurate description." June watched her, fascinated by this break in Eridani Reserve. "May I ask you something directly, Diplomat Nera?" She turned to face him. "You wish to know why I smiled?" "Yes. Because I knew it would confuse you," she said, and then did it again. That slight upward curve of her lips that shouldn't have been possible for an Eridani face. And because sometimes, Linguist Park, the most effective communication occurs when we step outside our cultural boundaries. The observation deck's lighting dimmed automatically as the station's night cycle began, leaving them standing in near darkness, illuminated only by the stars above and the glowing nebula beyond the dome. "I think," June said slowly, "this might be the most interesting diplomatic encounter I've had in 3 years on this station." Nera's eyes seemed to catch the light of the nebula, reflecting it back like tiny purple stars. "Then I suggest we make the most of it," she said. "We have much to learn from each other, and the night is just beginning." The observation deck was nearly empty. Most station personnel were either at the diplomatic reception or on duty elsewhere. A few off-duty crew members sat in a far corner, speaking quietly among themselves, but they paid no attention to June and Nera. June led the Eridani diplomat to the best viewing spot, where the nebula filled most of the visible sky. Its swirling gases glowed with purple, red, and blue light, creating patterns that seemed almost alive. "We have similar phenomena in Eridani space," Nera said, "but we do not build observation areas to watch them. Practical, not beautiful, is our approach to station design." "Humans need beauty," June replied. "It helps us think better, work better." Nera turned to face him. "This is one of many differences between our species that fascinate me." Her directness surprised June. Most Eridani took hours of formal conversation before discussing anything personal. Yet here was Nera, breaking protocol again. "May I ask you something that might seem rude?" June asked. "You wish to know about my smile," Nera said. Her voice had a musical quality when she wasn't using the formal diplomatic tone. "Yes, Eridani facial muscles aren't supposed to work that way." Nera's eyes fixed on his face, a common misconception. "Our facial muscles are capable of similar movements to yours. We simply do not use them for communication, or we did not, until contact with humans." She moved to one of the viewing benches and sat down, another break from the usual Eridani preference for standing during conversations. After a moment's hesitation, Jum sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "For the past year," Nera continued, "I have been studying human nonverbal communication. Your species fascinates me. You say as much with your faces and bodies as with your words." "And you've been practicing our expressions?" June asked. That small smile returned to her face. "Yes. Though I admit, it took months of muscle training before I could form even this simple curve." She pointed to her lips. "Your Earth saying is correct. It uses more muscles to frown than to smile." June couldn't help but laugh. "I can't believe you've been studying human facial expressions." "Not just expressions," Nera said. "Human humor, particularly what you call sarcasm. A concept completely absent in Eridani communication. So when I made the mistake with your rank, I saw an opportunity to practice." Her eyes showed a glint that, in a human, June would have recognized as amusement. "Your reaction was satisfying." June shook his head in wonder. I spent 3 years studying your species, and I never imagined an Eridani would be studying us right back, especially not our jokes and smiles. There is much about humans that interests the Eridani, though few of my people would admit it publicly, Nera said. She leaned back, looking up at the nebula. Your species is young compared to ours, less advanced in technology and science, but you possess qualities that many Eridani secretly admire. Like what? June asked, genuinely curious. Your adaptability. Your emotional resilience. Nera's voice softened, and your capacity for what you call thinking outside the box. Eridani education teaches strict patterns of logical thought. We excel at improving existing systems, but struggle to create truly new approaches. That's why you reached out to us, Jun realized, not just for our resources or as a political alliance. Some of us believe that our species have complementary strengths, Nora agreed. Eridani logic and precision, paired with human creativity and flexibility, could solve problems neither of us could address alone. The station's night cycle had fully engaged now. The observation deck's lights dimmed to their lowest setting, making the nebula and stars appear even brighter. The crew members in the corner had left, leaving June and Nera alone under the dome of stars. You said some of us believe this, June noted. I'm guessing not everyone in your government agrees. No. The traditionalists see humans as unpredictable, potentially dangerous. They advocate limited contact and carefully controlled information exchange. Nera's expression became serious. I belong to a younger faction that believes isolation is no longer viable in a connected galaxy. That explains why the other Eridani at the reception looked worried when you left with me. Yes, my behavior tonight would be considered inappropriate by traditional standards. So I take the risk? June asked. Nera was quiet for a moment, her eyes fixed on the swirling gases of the nebula. Because understanding cannot happen from a safe distance, she finally said. True exchange requires, what is your human phrase? Taking a leap of faith. June nodded, surprised again by her knowledge of human expressions. Tell me, Nera said, changing the subject slightly, about how humans respond to challenges. Our studies show your species often performs beyond expected capabilities when faced with difficulty. June thought for a moment. We call it rising to the occasion. When things get tough, many humans find strength they didn't know they had. Can you share a personal example? Nora asked. Your files indicate you grew up in challenging circumstances before becoming a xenolinguist. June raised an eyebrow. You've read my personal files. All diplomats study the backgrounds of key station personnel, Nora replied matter-of-factly. Your journey from a struggling rural community to becoming Earth's leading expert on Eridani language is unusual. June hadn't talked about his past in years, but something about Nera's direct interest made him willing to share. I grew up in a small farming town that was hit hard by climate shifts, he explained. Most families were struggling just to get by. No one expected kids from our town to go to university, let alone specialize in something like xenolinguistics. What changed for you? Nora asked. First contact happened. I was 16 when your ships appeared in our solar system. I watched the first broadcasts of Eridani speaking, and something just clicked in my brain. I could hear patterns in your language that others missed. June smiled at the memory. I didn't have fancy schools or connections, but I had determination. I studied every recording of Eridani speech I could find, taught myself your basic language structures from public broadcasts while working 2 jobs to save for school. And this determination came from your difficult circumstances? Nora asked. Partly. When you grow up with little, you learn to make much from nothing, to see opportunities others miss. June shrugged. Also, I was stubborn. Everyone said understanding Eridani language was too hard for humans. That made me want to prove them wrong. Nera made a sound that June realized, with shock, was a small laugh. Another human expression she had learned. This stubborn quality seems central to human achievement, she said. When told something is impossible, you become more determined to attempt it. Not all humans, Jun corrected, but many of us, yes. My research suggests this trait emerged from your species' survival challenges, Nera said. Eridani evolved on a world with stable climate and few predators. Humans faced a harsher environment that required constant adaptation. So you're saying we're stubborn because we had to be? I'm saying, Nera replied, that what some Eridani see as human recklessness may actually be your species' greatest strength. The observation deck's lighting shifted slightly, indicating the late-night cycle had begun. Soon the early morning shift would start preparing the station for the next day. It's getting late, Jun said. The trade negotiations start early tomorrow. Yes, Nora agreed, but made no move to leave. Instead, she looked directly at Jun with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. Thank you for this exchange, Linguist Park. It has been more valuable than 100 formal diplomatic meetings. For me too, Jun said honestly. I've learned more about Eridani thinking in the past hour than in 3 years of official study. Perhaps that is because tonight we spoke not as human and Eridani, but simply as two curious minds. Nera stood up, her slender form silhouetted against the glowing nebula. I hope we can continue this exchange during my time on the station. I'd like that, Jun said, rising to his feet as well. A small alert chime sounded throughout the deck, the station's automated system signaling the approach of midnight by station time. Neither Jun nor Nera made any move toward the exit. The night, it seemed, was not yet over. The peaceful moment was shattered by a sudden blaring alarm. Red emergency lights began flashing across the observation deck as the station's AI voice spoke over the intercom. Alert. Environmental system failure detected. All personnel report to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat. This is not a drill. Jun's comm unit buzzed. He answered it quickly, seeing Captain Min's worried face on the small screen. Hark, where are you? Min demanded. Observation deck with Diplomat Nera, Jun replied. Stay there. I'm sending someone to escort the diplomat back to the Eridani section. Min's voice was tense. We've got a serious problem. Primary environmental controls are failing. Backup systems aren't responding properly. What happened? Jun asked, as Nera moved closer to listen. Unknown. Possibly a cascade failure in the central processor. Engineering team was doing routine maintenance when something went wrong. Min looked off-screen, shouting orders to someone, then turned back. They're trapped in Section 7. Can't reach the main controls. Before Jun could respond, his comm unit beeped with an incoming call. It was from the Eridani delegation. Diplomat Nera is being requested to return immediately, Min said. I'll. Nera reached over and took the comm unit from Jun's hand. This is Diplomat Nera. I am remaining with Linguist Park. Inform the delegation I am safe and will return when the situation permits. She handed the comm back to Jun, who stared at her in surprise. Park, Min said, clearly flustered. The station AI estimates 3 hours before oxygen levels become critical in some sections. Stay put until we figure this out. The comm went dead. Almost immediately, the observation deck doors slid open, and several people rushed in, both human station staff and a group of Eridani diplomats. The lead Eridani, an older male named Tero, approached Nera directly. He spoke in rapid Eridani, his hand gestures sharp and precise. Diplomat Nera, you must return to our section immediately. We are implementing emergency protocols. Nera responded calmly in the same language. What is the situation assessment? One of the human officers, a woman Jun recognized from operations, stepped forward. The main environmental system is failing. Oxygen recycling, temperature control, and air pressure regulation are all becoming unstable. How did this happen? Jun asked. We don't know yet, she replied. The engineering team was performing standard updates when multiple systems began failing simultaneously. They're trapped in the maintenance section now. Tero made a dismissive gesture. The cause is irrelevant at present. We must focus on survival. He turned to the human officer. What is the station's emergency plan? We're trying to restart the backup systems, but they're not responding correctly. We've sent a distress signal, but the nearest ship is 2 days away. The observation deck quickly became an impromptu command center. More station personnel arrived, bringing portable computers and communication equipment. The Eridani delegation huddled in one corner, speaking in low voices while consulting their own devices. June watched as Nera joined her colleagues. Unlike the other Eridani, who maintained their usual stiff posture even in crisis, Nera seemed more relaxed, almost human in her movements. After several minutes, Tero approached the human group. "We have completed our analysis," he announced. "Based on current failure rates, oxygen will become critically low in 3 hours and 14 minutes. The human section will be affected first due to higher consumption rates." Captain Min, who had just arrived, frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "Logical resource allocation," Tero replied calmly. "We should seal off the lowest priority sections to preserve air for essential personnel." "You're talking about sacrificing parts of the station," Min said, his voice hard. "We are talking about maximizing survival probability," Tero corrected. "The Eridani section has more efficient life support and lower oxygen needs. If we redirect remaining resources—" "No," Min interrupted. "We're not sacrificing anyone. We need to fix the problem, not just manage it." June noticed Nera standing slightly apart from the other Eridani, watching the exchange. When their eyes met, he saw that same small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't mocking this time, but seemed almost expectant. The station's chief engineer joined the discussion via comlink, her face appearing on a large screen. "We've tried remote restarts of the backup systems, but they're not responding. Someone needs to manually reset the environmental controls from the main hub." "Why can't your team do it?" Tero asked. "We're trapped in Section 7, the engineer explained. The emergency bulkhead sealed automatically when the systems started failing. We can't get to the main environmental hub." Captain Min looked around the room. "So we need volunteers to go to the hub and perform a manual reset." "Yes, but it's not that simple," the engineer said. "The corridors leading to the hub are showing dangerous temperature fluctuations and possible toxic gas leaks from damaged recycling units, and whoever goes will need to understand both human and Eridani technology. The systems were integrated during the last upgrade." A heavy silence fell over the room. The path to the environmental hub would take someone through the most dangerous parts of the failing station. June found himself thinking about what Nera had said about human adaptability and Eridani precision. Neither alone would be enough to solve this crisis. He stepped forward. "I'll go," he said. Captain Min shook his head. "Park, you're not an engineer." "No, but I understand Eridani systems better than most humans," June argued. "And I've had basic emergency system training like everyone else on the station." "It's too dangerous," Min insisted. "We need to find another way." "There is no other way," June said firmly. "And we're running out of time." Tero made a dismissive gesture. "A linguist cannot possibly understand the complexities of our environmental technology." "I will accompany him," Nera said suddenly, stepping away from the Eridani group. Everyone turned to stare at her. Tero's face showed the Eridani equivalent of shock. A slight widening of the eyes and stiffening of the crown ridges. "Diplomat Nera, this is highly irregular," he said. "Your safety is a priority for—" "I have engineering training," Nera interrupted, something no junior Eridani would normally do to a senior. "Before diplomatic service, I worked in systems integration. I understand how our technology interfaces with human systems." She moved to stand beside June. "Linguist Park is correct. We do not have time for lengthy deliberations. The situation requires immediate action." Tero looked like he wanted to object further, But Captain Min spoke first. "If you're both sure about this, we need to move quickly." He turned to the operations officer. "Get them emergency gear and the tools they'll need. Full protective suits, brothers, the works. The route to the hub will be dangerous," the engineer warned from the screen. "I'm sending a map with the safest path, but conditions are changing rapidly. You'll need to adapt as you go." June caught Nara's eye at the word adapt. She gave him that small smile again. 20 minutes later, they were ready. Dressed in protective gear, with equipment packs strapped to their backs, they stood at the exit of the observation deck. The engineer had sent detailed instructions on how to reset the environmental systems once they reached the hub. 3 hours until critical oxygen failure, Captain Min reminded them. "Try to be back before then. Stay in communication as long as possible," the operations officer added, handing them each an emergency comm unit. "But be prepared for dead zones as the station's systems continue to degrade." Taro approached Nero one last time. "This mission has only a 43% chance of success," he said quietly in Eridani. "There are more logical approaches we could pursue." "Sometimes logic must give way to action," Nero replied. Then, switching to English, she added, "Let's go, Linguist Park. We have a station to save." As the doors closed behind them, Jun realized that this night had become far more eventful than he could have possibly imagined when he first saw Nara's sarcastic smile at the reception. Together, they headed into the increasingly dangerous corridors of the failing station, their unlikely partnership about to be tested in ways neither could have anticipated. The station corridors were almost unrecognizable. Emergency lights cast eerie red shadows on the walls. The air felt wrong, too thin in some sections, too humid in others. Warning lights flashed on nearly every control panel they passed. "The environmental hub is 3 levels down," Jun said, checking the map on his handheld device. "We need to take service tunnel B7. Nara nodded, her face partially hidden behind her breathing mask. Even with the protective gear, Jun could see her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, analyzing. "The logical path would be through the main corridor," she said, "but sensor readings showed dangerous temperature levels there. We should use the maintenance shafts instead." They found the entrance to the maintenance shaft, a narrow tube with a ladder running down its center. As they climbed down, the station shuddered around them. "What was that?" Jun asked. "Pressure fluctuations," Nero replied calmly. "The environmental system failures are affecting structural integrity." When they reached the next level, they found their planned route blocked by a sealed emergency door. "The system must have detected a hazard beyond this point," Nara said, checking the door's control panel. "It will not open through normal means." Jun consulted their map. "The alternate route will take us through Section 12. That's a 20-minute detour, and we don't have that kind of time." Nara began a precise analysis. "We could attempt to override the emergency protocols, but that would require administrative access codes which neither of us." She stopped mid-sentence as Jun moved to an equipment cabinet on the wall. He pulled out a small toolkit and began removing the panel next to the door. "What are you doing?" Nara asked. "Making a new path," Jun replied, exposing the door's internal wiring. "When I was studying at the academy, we had a training exercise where they locked us in rooms with failing life support. We had to find ways out." "That seems unnecessarily dangerous for training." Jun smiled behind his mask. "Humans learn best under pressure." He carefully separated 2 wires. "In the exercise, I found that these emergency doors have a manual override that's separate from the main computer system. That is not in any of the official schematics," Nara observed. "Human engineers like to build backdoors," Jun explained. "They don't always document them." He connected the wires to his handheld device and ran a simple bypass program. The door slid open with a hiss. "Impressive," Nara admitted. "Unorthodox, but effective." They continued through increasingly hazardous sections of the station. Twice they had to change course when corridors became impassable. In one section, The air was so cold their breath froze in front of them. In another, the gravity fluctuated wildly, forcing them to crawl along the floor to avoid floating away. Their comm units crackled with static as Captain Min tried to reach them. Park. Nara. Status update. We're making progress, Jun reported. About halfway to the hub. Conditions are deteriorating, but we're adapting. Hurry. Oxygen levels. Dropping faster than predicted. The communication cut out completely. Jun checked his device. We've lost connection to the main systems. We're on our own now. They reached a junction where 3 corridors met. Nara consulted their map. The hub should be through that doorway, she said, pointing ahead. But these readings suggest a toxic gas leak in that section. Before they could decide on an alternate route, a loud crack echoed through the corridor. A ceiling panel broke loose and crashed down, narrowly missing them. More panels began to fall as the station's structural integrity continued to weaken. Run, Jun shouted. They sprinted toward the doorway Nara had indicated, debris falling around them. Just as they reached it, a large section of ceiling collapsed. Jun dove through the doorway, but heard Nara cry out behind him. He turned to see her trapped, a heavy metal panel pinning her leg to the floor. Her face showed no pain. Eridani were trained from childhood to suppress such reactions, but her leg was clearly injured. Go, she said calmly. Complete the mission. It is the logical choice. Jun didn't hesitate. He went back and began lifting the metal panel. I'm not leaving you behind. This is irrational, Nara argued. Your survival chances decrease by 64% if you delay for me. Maybe, Jun grunted as he strained against the weight. But humans don't always do what's logical. With a final effort, he lifted the panel enough for Nara to pull free. Her leg was badly cut, leaking the dark purple fluid that served as Eridani blood. Can you walk? He asked. She tried to stand but stumbled. No, the damage is significant. Without a word, Jun lifted her into his arms. Eridani were lighter than humans due to their different bone structure, but it was still a struggle in the failing gravity and with his own equipment pack. This is unnecessary, Nara protested. You should. Save your breath, Jun interrupted. We're doing this my way now. He carried her through the next corridor, following the map on his device, which Nara held for him. The environmental hub was close, but the station's condition was worsening by the minute. Warning alarms blared from every panel they passed. When they finally reached the hub, Jun gently set Nara down near the main control console. The room was filled with blinking red lights and warning messages on every screen. What do we need to do? He asked. Nara, despite her injury, focused immediately on the task. The primary system is beyond repair. We need to force a complete reset of the backup systems and manually initialize each component in the correct sequence. She pointed to different sections of the console. You handle the human systems, oxygen, and temperature. I will manage the Eridani technology components. Together, they work to bring the backup systems online. Jun followed Nara's precise instructions, amazed at her technical knowledge and calm focus despite her injury. When they encountered problems, Jun improvised solutions that Nara would never have considered. The pressure regulator won't initialize, Jun said after several failed attempts. The protocols require specific sequences, Nara explained. Without the proper codes, we cannot. Forget the protocols, Jun interrupted. He opened a maintenance panel under the console. Sometimes you need to convince technology to cooperate. He disconnected several components and rewired them in a new configuration. Nara watched with what seemed like fascination. That configuration violates at least 7 safety protocols, she observed. But will it work? Jun asked. Theoretically, yes, but then that's all that matters right now. When Jun reconnected the system, the pressure regulator came online. One by one, they reactivated the essential environmental systems. The warning lights began changing from red to yellow, then finally to green. "System stabilizing," Nara announced. "Oxygen levels are returning to normal parameters." June slumped against the console, exhausted. "We did it." "Yes," Nara agreed. "Your unorthodox methods were effective." The main communication system suddenly reactivated. Captain Min's voice filled the room. "Park. Diplomat Nara. Do you copy? The systems are coming back online." "We copy," Jun replied. "The environmental hub is secure, but Nara is injured. We need medical assistance." "On the way," Min responded. "You two just saved everyone on this station. Well done." 2 days later, Jun sat beside Nara's bed in the medical bay. Her leg was healing well. Eridani recovered from injuries faster than humans. "The trade negotiations have been postponed," Jun told her. "But Captain Min says the Eridani delegation seems more open to cooperation than before." "Our shared crisis has altered perspectives," Nara said. "Even Taro has acknowledged that the human approach had merit in this situation." "High praise from a traditionalist," Jun laughed. Nara's expression became serious. "You carried me to the hub despite knowing it reduced your own chances of survival. This is what I have been trying to understand about humans, this willingness to reject logical self-preservation. We call it compassion," Jun said simply, "or friendship. The Eridani have similar concepts, but they are considered secondary to logical outcomes." She paused. "My experience has shown me that perhaps they should not be." Jun smiled. "Does this mean you'll include this observation in your diplomatic reports?" "Yes," Nara replied. "I will report that what we once considered human weakness, your emotional connections, your willingness to take risks, your rejection of pure logic, may actually be your species' greatest strength." She reached out and touched his hand, an extremely rare gesture for an Eridani, "and I will report that understanding this strength requires more than distant observation. It requires direct experience." When she smiled at him this time, there was nothing sarcastic about it. It was genuine, an expression that would shock most Eridani, but seemed perfectly natural on her face now. "I would like to continue our cultural exchange during my recovery," she said. "I find I have much more to learn about humans." "I'd like that," Jun replied, returning her smile. "And I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a very interesting friendship." As they sat together in the quiet medical bay, Jun reflected on how a simple sarcastic smile at a diplomatic reception had led to one of the most remarkable nights of his life, one that had changed his understanding not just of the Eridani, but of humanity's unique place in the galaxy.